as you know, and it has three pieces to it. If we were going to break down the architecture of the Yud, it has three parts to it. Can you see my mouse as I kind of roll over the image? Do you see that, the pointer? Yes? Thumbs up? Okay. So the top point of the Yud is the first area of focus. Then there's the body of the Yud, which is, the bulk of the Yud is what we would call the body, which is there. Okay, I'm just moving the mouse over the main part of the Yud. And then there's the bottom of the Yud. Now, this is the way the Yud is drawn or written in a Torah scroll, which means that it's the most official way of writing the Yud. If you're writing Hebrew, what we would call Hebrew script or shorthand, like if you're writing a letter in Hebrew, you're not going to use the same lettering as is found in a Torah scroll. You're probably not using a quill to draw each letter, perfectly shaped as it is in a Torah scroll or in a pair of tefillin or on a mezuzah scroll. You're just going to write the letters in shorthand, and your Yud is probably going to look like you'll take your pen and move it a little bit down, and that will be your Yud. You'll make a little bit of a line, not a longer line, which is a Vav. You'll make a little bit of a line, like a point, and drag it a drop, and that will be your Yud. But that's the way we write Yud in a casual setting. In the formal Torah script, which means the official kosher rendition of the letter, the Yud looks like this on your screen. Again, aside from the lighter brushstroke, which is to create that artistic flair a little bit in the image. But the Yud has a point on the top, it has a point on the bottom, and it has the body in the middle. Overall, if you zoom out, right, I don't know if I can make this small, I can only make it bigger, but if you were to look at this from a distance, it would look kind of like just a point. It would just look like, a point. But when you get a little bit closer, right, it looks just like a drop. But you look a little bit closer, you realize it has shape to it, a point, a body in the middle, and this will be very instructive. Because, as we've seen last week, there are three elements to the creative process. Or three, there's a progression of how we think in a creative way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share another screen with you, get a whiteboard, because I want to draw something for you. Okay, this is the way that I picture it. It doesn't mean that it's exactly 100% accurate, but this is the way that my mind works, just to visualize the three dimensions of creative thinking. Okay, so let's do this together. Hopefully I'm in the drawing app. I think I am. Okay, step one is what I would call the creative wave. Okay, now, is that a perfect wave? No, but it's my wave. Okay, so that's the creative wave. The next step is what we would call the creative point, and it's just one dot. And then the next step we would call, what would be a good name for it? It would be different lines. So the way I'm going to depict it, the way my mind conceives of these ideas, I'm depicting kind of on this whiteboard the way my mind perceives it, you would have different lines like this. I'm going to tell you very soon exactly what all these points represent. So this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. So 1 is the wave, 2 is the point, and 3 are the lines. Let me explain what all of this represents. We explained last week that the first step of the creative process, the first point of Chachma, is where the idea, again, Chachma is creative intelligence, where the mind is gushing forth an idea. It's really beyond the mind, but it's an idea is gushing forth. So that is the highest step of the creative process. And on that level, your idea, even your creative idea, even in a state of creativity, is not yet defined. In other words, even relative to the creative process, this is still undefined. It's still a notion of an idea as opposed to the idea itself. And that's a very important distinction. You could have an idea, but before the idea, you have almost the idea of an idea. You have an idea that you have an idea, but you don't yet know what the idea is. This we explained last week. I think it was Sandy who kind of articulated it this way. It's kind of like a feeling that you have an idea. You don't yet have the idea. In other words, you don't yet know the idea, but you have a sense that you know or are about to know the idea. It's like that sensation that something is brewing. You know, so I'm depicting it as a wave. And the reason why I'm referring to it as a wave is because in our text, he used that language. He says it's kind of like flowing. It's like a wave that's flowing. He also used the example of like a lightning flash in the sky, which we've explored many times in many classes. But it's this notion of an idea that's not yet locked down in any way, even in a creative way. If somebody at that point, at that stage of the creative process, if somebody says, I see you have an idea, can you tell me what it is? Not only can you not tell them what it is, but you can't even tell yourself what it is. You don't even have enough clarity on your own to say, I'll tell you soon. You know, you're not even in the process of moving it from you to them. You're in the process of moving it from the beyond to you, if that makes sense. So it's not yet even solidified in any way by you. It's still flowing from beyond. Now, we've explained many times that where does Chachma come from? Where does creativity come from? It's like suddenly you got an idea or an idea of an idea. Where did that come from? It was in your head? Then you should know it. So where did it come from? As we've explained countless times in these classes, Kabbalah classes Sunday mornings, Chachma, creativity, is coming from a dimension beyond understanding. In other words, it's coming from a supernatural, if you will, reservoir of ideas that are beyond what you or I individually happen to know. A simple way of understanding this is, think about if you could define and quantify. You could put a number on anything almost, right? If you can quantify the amount of things that you know, whatever that is, 1 million, 1 billion, it doesn't matter how big the number is. But imagine you quantify, you put a number to exactly how many things that you know. Great. And then you think about how many things does the other person know, right? How many things does the person next to you or across the Zoom universe, right? On this, how many things did they know? Okay, also a big number. How many of those things are similar? You'll have many things that are like the crossover that are similar to you and them. But can you imagine? Possibly. Can you fathom? Can you theorize that they might know something that you don't? Absolutely, right? Of course. It would be ludicrous to say that they don't know anything that you don't, right? Of course, they know things that you don't, and vice versa. You know things that they don't. Although there's a lot in common, there are many things that are known by one person that are not known by another person. Then can you imagine, forget about one other person, can you imagine how many billion are we now? 8 billion? 8.5 billion people. Can you imagine the collective knowledge of all the people on planet Earth? Staggering amount of knowledge. You think about how many things you know, it's a staggering number. You know a lot of things. You imagine what you plus one other person, it's a really staggering number. Can you imagine you plus 8.5 billion people, the amount of knowledge that's out there? Again, a lot of it is the same, but a lot of it is unique. So if you can imagine that, if you can imagine a collection of wisdom that is not inside your own head, but lies outside of you in this world, then you can also extend that to imagine the wisdom that lies outside all 8.5 billion people. Imagine a wisdom, a source of information that lies not just amongst all people, but lies outside people. Because there's a source of wisdom. There's a source of wisdom, a source of ideas that transcends the human mind. And it's from that source, that reservoir of ideas, and I use that term intentionally. It's like a well, or like a well of water. We're blessed with plumbing. Most of us are blessed with plumbing. So what do we know about wells? Who needs to know about wells? But a well, back in the day, a well was very important. If you didn't have a well, or a river, or a lake, or whatever, you weren't drinking. A well is wonderful because, especially if it's a naturally producing well of water, that means that there's always water available for the taking. So it's water that you don't have. You can go there, you take your bucket, you lower your bucket, and you draw from that space, and then you enjoy the water. And in a very similar way, we have this idea of wisdom, where there's a well of wisdom, and the human mind can go and draw from that, lower its bucket, and draw from that wisdom. The way that process works, these are the internal mechanics, not the process, but internally what's going on. The way that process works is through the attribute, through the quality known as bittul. Bittul means the notion of self-nullification or surrender, essentially, which means that the mind itself is humble enough to know what it doesn't know, and therefore pursues the wisdom outside of its box of knowledge, and is able to say, I don't know, therefore I'm going to surrender my mind to what is out there or what could be. It's typically in those moments when the mind is more relaxed than tense that the creative flow happens, because the mind is letting go of what it knows and is open to receiving from the beyond. So again, in general, there's a state of relaxation that we can put our minds into that is more conducive to the creative flow. If you're very tense, if you feel like you need to come up with a creative idea, that could very easily work against you, because the more the mind tenses, the more it's locked into where it is, the less it's in that relaxed state to be open to taking in new information. The first step of when that new information comes into the mind yet does not recognize the idea. It's so beyond what the mind already knows. Let me just explain. If it's what the mind already knows, then it's not a creative idea, and that's not what we're talking about, right? If it's what you already know, that's great, but that's not what we're talking about. So if it's truly new, hey, Ella, good morning. If it's truly new, right? If it's truly creative, then the moment that idea hits the mind does not recognize the idea. It's unfamiliar to the mind. And so the way the mind reacts to it is kind of like, imagine a puzzled or quizzical look on one's face. Like, not sure yet what this is. Interesting, but not sure yet what it is. Because the mind is not accustomed to this idea. It's a brand new idea. So what's going on is that this idea is flowing into the mind. The mind is not yet wrapping itself around the idea. The mind yet doesn't contextualize the idea. It doesn't comprehend the idea. It hasn't had time to analyze the idea. None of the other intellectual processes have happened. The idea is just flowing in the mind. That is the most, the word I'm going to use is fleeting or vulnerable or shaky. I mean, all of these are good words to describe this process. It's very vulnerable. What I mean, let me tell you what I mean by that. What I mean is that at any moment, that flow could stop, or you just could get distracted and not focus on it and not get it, and it can come in and you can sense that you had something, and then it can quickly and easily flow past and through, and you'll be left with, oh, I guess I don't know. I guess the idea, it's easy to not settle, let's put it that way. It's easy that it would flow through and never settle into the mind to the next steps. But if it does, these are the next steps that are happening. So step one is the flow. This is the highest point of Chachma, or I'm not going to use the word point. This is the higher depth, because point is the second part. It's the highest dimension or aspect of Chachma. It's the flow of Chachma. It's not the point of Chachma, it's the flow of Chachma. And it's very undefined. Then we have step two, which is the point of Chachma. So that's what I drew over here. So we have like the flow, the wave, and then we have the point. So now it's defined. You know, in quantum physics, you have wave and particle. There's wave, when quantum physics, we have the notion of waves and particles. Right? So a wave is one form of energy, and particle is another. And when you could have things that you can't measure, or that they don't have a defined place, they're more like a wave, and then when you measure them, suddenly they become a particle, they become identified where they are. In a similar way, the mind works. The mind is a really good example of quantum physics at play. Because what's happening in the mind is that when the mind does focus, if it's able to somehow corral the wave, because the wave is by definition higher than, but if the mind is able to corral the wave, right? So what happens then is the idea can crystallize as a point, as a defined, I'm not going to say defined, as a point. Now the point, which is step two, stage two, the point is, I use the word defined, I don't really mean defined, I mean it's an undefined, but it's still a point. So the best way I can explain this is when you think about a creative idea, not the notion of an idea, but actually a creative idea. So the more creative an idea, the more it can kind of morph into many different things. So the more adaptable it is. The more creative something is, the more adaptable something is. So let's say you have a vision. You want to create something. Let's say you want to create a story. Whatever medium you're going to use. Maybe you'll use paint, music, literature, film, whatever, dance, opera, who knows. So you want to tell a story. And you have an idea of what that story is. But before you have an idea of what the story is, you have like a core creative concept. Not one that tells you exactly what you're going to do, but a core concept that guides the rest of the process. A core idea of what it is that you want to share with the world. Like, I want to share, I'm not even going to give you a specific example, but whatever that is, I want to share this value, this idea, this theme, this notion with the world. That's my point. But you and I know that can take on any number of different ways of expression. You can convey that core idea, that big idea, you can convey that in any number of ways. Even within one form, let's talk about writing, literature. How many ways, if you have a theme in mind, how many ways in writing can you express that? Innumerable, almost infinite. Poetry, prose, narration, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can write it. And even within one style, you can write it in any number of ways. So, the point of Chachma, which is step number two, right? Step one is the wave, where you don't even get it. It's still, you're learning to get it, right? Step two is, okay, it's kind of crystallizing. The creative idea is crystallizing. But because it's so creative, the possibilities are now endless. You have a general point, right, of Chachma, creative point, but at this stage, it's wide open. Which brings me to stage number 3, which is no longer Chachma. Stage 3 moves into what we call Bina. Bina is typically translated as understanding, but I'm going to give a different twist to it. It's not analysis. I guess you could use understanding, but it's where you've taken the point. I'll tell you what it is. One-word definitions are not necessarily so helpful. What it is in concept is this. It's when you've taken the point of Chachma and now you've broken it down to the point where you've created a very specific way of understanding that point. That could have gone any number of ways. Now you've broken it down, and now you understand it a certain way. I want to give you an example. I was thinking about it today. An example with kids. So Ellie, come, you'll be my kid example. Okay? Here, we're going to get Ellie involved here. Okay, so Ellie is, how old are you now?
6.
Ellie is 6. So a 6-year-old, I don't think he's too old for this. So I think 6 is a good age. So when you're 6, and let's say a big box arrives in your house, right? Like a big box of stuff. Okay, so what happens? So let's say something for the 6-year-old came inside the box. We know the rule of life is that the child is usually, or very often, more excited about the box than the thing, right? A child might be more excited. You like playing with the boxes sometimes? Mm-mm. Okay, so there you go. The next rule is it's never going to work when you do a live thing. But nonetheless, so a child might find the box to be very compelling, very exciting. To create, you can create a rocket ship out of a box. You can create a place for hide and go seek. You can create all sorts of things out of a box. Box has so many possibilities. Now, when adults look at boxes, many adults, not all adults, but many adults look at a box and they say, "Oh, it's a shipping box, and now that it's done, I'm gonna, open it up, cut it open, and then recycle it, and hopefully you'll have another opportunity, a reincarnation, if you will, of the box, and go to a good purpose." But the box has fulfilled its purpose or its utility for me. Kids are a little bit more open, sometimes, oftentimes, to the possibilities. Why? So it comes back to stages 2 and 3. It comes back to exactly these ideas. You see, when you look at something and you look at it and you remain in your own head, this is not a box, a shipping box that has a defined purpose and utility. No, this is an idea or a concept or a creative material. You're not locking yourself into a certain definition of what it is. The possibilities then are endless. The more you analyze the box and tell yourself what that is, the less it can become, because you've already told the story of what it is. So what else can it be? It's only that story that you've told. So the limitation of step 3, which I'm going to circle right now, Bina, the limitation of Bina is that the more you analyze something, the more you break it down, the more you know it, the more locked in it becomes, and the less it can become. Which is why in general, children find it easier to be more creative than adults. I'm not saying adults aren't creative. Of course not. Adults are very creative. And I don't mean to say that the creativity of children surpasses the creativity of adults. What I'm saying is the ease of moving to that creative space oftentimes is found. It's easier in children than adults. Why? Simple. Because children yet don't have all of these lines drawn out for themselves. They don't have all of these stories told of like, okay, this is what it is, This is what it does. This is not what it does, and it is what it is. Children don't have all those connections made. They don't have all those decisions made about what things are and what they can be. Sometimes adults make decisions about what things are. We make decisions about things. We make decisions about people. We tell ourselves this person can be that, they can't be something else. We make decisions all the time about what things are and what things aren't. And our decisions come from our understanding of the world, our perception of the world, which is a great benefit to us, but also a great hindrance to us. It really holds us back. Because instead of seeing possibilities, we see definitions. And the moment something is defined, well, that's all it is, and it can't be something else. So the moment we've moved to that being a stage where things, I drew it in lines because that's how my mind conceptualized it, as a defined understanding, different pieces. This piece, that piece, the next piece, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3, analysis, understand it, I got it. The more we do that, maybe it represents a mature mind, but it also takes us away from the possibility. So to recap, we have 3 stages. Yeah.
Rabbi, can I ask a question now, or do you want me to wait?
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah. In trying to, I'm appreciating how when you started saying this is the way you're understanding it, because I think that this is something we each need to make meaning of it in our, in a way. So I'm just wondering out loud. I was sort of thinking, using the word ethereal almost for the feeling, or ethereal for the first.
Right.
But for the second and third, I came to words like imagination, reality, or in thinking about language, figurative language or literal. Just thinking about the different ways that children can play with language, but then become more literal. So am I being too? Am I trying to concretize it too much, or is that?
No. I like that. I think it'd be very helpful. Those language. So figurative and literal, right?
Figurative
So we have
imagination and reality.
An imagination and reality. Right.
And 1 was just ethereal. That was the word I used for either of those combinations.
Yeah. So I think ethereal is very good, and I like the others as well, because I think that the way it works is going to, as you said and as you open, is going to be different in every single person, because no 2 minds are working exactly alike. When I say that, what I mean is no 2 minds are thinking the same thing, are taking the same amount of time to think through things. No one is mirroring the exact same process of anyone else, which is why the mind is so amazing. But we have these, at least in Kabbalah, these definitive stages where you have a sensation of an idea. Then you have where it kind of crystallizes, but still crystallizes in an abstract way, which gives it the infinite possibility, but it's still something that has the infinite possibility. It's not still ethereal where you don't know what it is. It's still it's now something that has the possibility. And then there's, as you lock it in, you've taken away the possibility and now you've defined it. So many adults love definition.
I just wanted to also say that in at the same time too, it was really helpful to see your process of figuring it out. Because it's almost like because I think for not just what we're talking about here, but for so many of these very, abstract is the wrong word, ideas, philosophical ideas, Kabbalistic ideas, that it's so helpful to see the process that you go through to make meaning of something.
Yeah, and do you mean me specifically?
Yeah, how you just basically modeling that. I think that was really helpful.
Yeah, so I was thinking about saying that because, so for me, my process for Kabbalah, teaching Kabbalah, is obviously I'm studying the original, right? I study it many times. I've studied it before the series began. I studied it all 32 chapters through multiple times, and then every week I study a few chapters that we're focused on to get the flow and then my process is, to try to collect the ideas, that kind of that wave state where ideas are just, the ideas are just bouncing. I'm not really even like concretizing anything. But then really the work, again, just bring you into my process. I have like the point, I think, like the general point of what we're going to discuss. But then there's so many different ways to express it. So, my email that I write on Fridays, which gives a basic introduction, a teaser for what we're going to cover Sunday. There are usually a dozen different ideas that I have for that one email about what's going to happen on Sunday. And to me, that's this process. That's, okay, I have the point, but because it's just a point, not just, because it's at that higher point stage, it can go in so many different directions, right? So, and then I choose one for the email and I write it. And then I think about my approach for teaching it today. We could do in text, I could tell a story, we can give an analogy, I can use the whiteboard. So there are many different ways. And again, I just speaking about process, so I did try to mirror the process. I actually thought about sharing that, but I'm glad that you pointed it out, because there is a mirroring of the process. And this is not just unique to me, obviously. This is, everyone does this in their own way, in their own field, whatever that is. But it's amazing when you break down the mind and that process. It's kind of amazing to think about how we think. And especially when you're talking about children, it's, you have this great laboratory to see how children's minds develop, and how they start off maybe at the Chachma stage, how they arrive at the Bina stage, how that process works for different children, how we can intentionally help them get from one stage to the other, and able to concretize their ideas and put language to their feelings, because that's very important. We want them to articulate how they feel and not just remain nebulous, but then we also want them to keep their creative side as well. So it's always that balance of, we want you to become concrete. Not we want you, but it's helpful for you to concretize, but it's also helpful for you to move back to that abstract state. So there's that wonderful laboratory of the human mind when as you discussed, when it comes to looking at children and development of children. But it's not unique to children. It's in every human being, young or old. But we see different strengths. One thing that's clear to me is that a strength of adulthood, of maturity, is stage 3, which is Bina. That's definitely a stage. And we pride ourselves on being able to make sense of the world, being able to understand things, what they are, what they aren't. And that's a great quality. But it can, the more you exercise that muscle, it could come at the expense of 2, which is that the creative vision. And I think it's so important. I mean, Sandy, we did work together, right? On, vision, creative vision.
Yeah.
And it's a process. How do you move away from what you're doing to thinking about kind of going back and dreaming? And that's, and if you're used to moving things down, to move things back up, I'm using up and down 1, 2, 3. I've listed it in a high, not a hierarchy, but a 1, then 2, then 3. So that's what I'm referencing. So we're used to typically moving downward in this flow. To move back up sometimes is going against the grain, swimming against the current. But it's so important, especially when it comes to, in all areas, especially when it comes to understanding other human beings. When we understand things the way we understand, which is stage 3, the way our mind works, it can become very difficult to relate to someone else who doesn't think that way. When we move back to more of a creative state of thinking, right, where we're not understanding things in a concrete form, but more of an idea form. And again, I'm using language that may not be precise, but just the way that I'm thinking about it right now, we might be able to relate more to the other and say to ourselves, wait a second, they're actually believing and thinking and saying and doing the same thing that I am, but in a different way. The way it's manifest on the lowest level, so to speak, it's very different. But if you move back up, it's essentially the same thing. And that's where understanding can come in. When we move to a little bit of a higher perspective, higher vantage point, we can see things that otherwise, stuck in the weeds, so to speak, we can't see. So there are many benefits of exploring this process and really understanding how the mind works. Again, on so many different levels, this is, excuse me, this is something that is critically important. Okay. Any questions or comments thus far? Questions or comments? I'm stopping sharing for a moment just to check in with all y'all. Questions or comments? No? Made sense? Okay. I'm glad. That's it.
Yes.
Very interesting, yes.
Awesome. Okay, good. So far, so good. So now we're going to jump into some text. We're going to finish chapter 22, and we're going to start chapter 23. Chapter 23 is the one that speaks about the architecture of the Yud. Don't worry, we're going to get back to it. Remember I showed you the shape of the Yud? For those that were on from the beginning, I showed the shape of the letter Yud. We're going to get back to it, and we're going to map out. I was trying to Google, maybe I didn't do a good job, find like a picture, like an image of a Yud with kind of like a blueprint look, like architectural, whatever. But we're going to break it down architecturally to understand how the Yud captures the mind. It's a really beautiful idea, how that shape captures the way the mind works. But let's jump inside. We're going to do, like I said, we're going to finish the text, the text of chapter 22, and jump into chapter 23. Okay. Text is open. Let me share my screen with you one more time. Okay, we are not on page 1. Let's see, maybe we're on page 40. Let's see if that works. Nope, not at all. Let's go down to page 60. We're getting closer. Okay, here we go. So, last week we spoke about these levels of the way the mind works in the context of Chachma and Bina. We explained, I'm going to hone in on the text soon. We explained that the first level of Chachma, as we've discussed today, is that wave. It's ethereal, it's nebulous, it's not defined, it's undefined, not even to you. You don't even know it yet. You know that you might know it, or know that you could know it, but you don't know it yet. It's still flowing. Then you have where it crystallizes and becomes a point. It becomes a nakuda, an idea, but it's still an idea of an idea, right? It's still creative, but it's now at least defined to you on some level. At least you have an idea. Before you had an idea of an idea, now you have an idea, not concretized. And then the next level down is Bina, where it's really broken down and defined, and then it's not creative anymore because it's defined. Step 1, step 2, step 3. So let's jump in. We're going to review. No, I'm not going to review that because we did it last week. Okay, let's jump in right over here. We are going to. It's going back a drop, but just so we get a running start into the text. Here we go. Second paragraph. When compared. When compared to the grasp of Bina, the way I depicted it in my whiteboard before, that level 3, that third step with the lines. So when compared to that grasp, the definition of Bina, the point of Chachma, stage 2, is not yet graspable. I mean, at that level, you don't have it. It's not defined. It's an idea, but it's still could go any different direction. It can go. It's almost infinite possibility. The grasp of Bina truly entails a limitation that does not yet exist in the faculty of Chachma, as already mentioned. In comparison to the level above it, however, the well-defined point of Chachma is indeed grasped. In other words, relative to 3, 2 is undefined. Relative to 1, 2 is defined. I'm going to share my screen with you one more time. Sorry, I'm going to share the whiteboard with you one more time because it's important that we see this. Again, it's all about relativity. This is the last thing I mentioned last week. It's all about relativity. So the way it works is like this. Relative to 3, right? Stage 2 is vague. 3 is defined, 2 is still abstract. But relative to 1, 2 is absolutely defined. Right? Again, hold on one second. Right? So again, let me do one more time. Relative to 3, 2 is abstract. Relative to 1, 2 is defined. So 2 is called the point. It's still an abstract point. But relative to 1 was just, you didn't have anything. It was just a wave flowing through your mind. So when you get something, some definition. But it's still not defined to the point where it's lost that creative edge. That's step 3. So that's what he's saying in this text. Let's go back to sharing the text. Okay, here we go. Next paragraph. The author returns to the case of the wise man, or wise person, who first experiences an idea as a flash, and then upon grasping it is able to convey it to others. Okay, so let's get back into that example. This revelation of a concept, developed point of Chachma, takes an intellectual form in a manner necessary for the recipients. It is an intellectual light proportionate to the recipients. In other words, stage 2, where your idea becomes an idea that you can work with, it's still not defined, but it's at least an idea. So that means that it's now ready to develop. You cannot develop stage 1. Stage 1 is, it's not even, you don't even have it. So it's not developed. It's like, it's just flowing. Stage 2, where it's now taken some sort of form on some level, now you can take that and develop it to your audience. It is an intellectual light proportionate to the recipients. By contrast, stage 1, which is the flow of intellect mentioned above, right? Sandrine, I think you're getting unmuted. Hold on one second. Okay. By contrast, the flow of intellect mentioned above, which is stage 1, i.e. the initial flash, is not at all at the level of the recipients. It's not even at the level of you, to be honest. But that flow, you're not going to take the flow and then make a plan with the flow. The flow is still beyond you. It's still beyond a plan. It has to move from the stage of the flow to the point and then move to an applied place. It is the ayin. Look at this. It is the ayin of Chachma. I'm going to highlight that in the text. The ayin. Ayin means nothingness or undefined, nebulous, ethereal dimension of Chachma. Or, alternatively, it's called the wonders of Chachma. Wonder meaning, the word wonder evokes something that's completely beyond a person. It's like when you see something that just takes your breath away. You can't even process it. You can't even understand it. It's just like, it's breathtaking. It's like a wonder. So that's what it means. The first dimension of Chachma, the highest level, which is that flow, that wave, it's ayin. It's nothing. When I say nothing, it's undefined, completely undefined. And it's the wonder, pliot Chachma, not being revealed and enclosed in the cerebral vessels of Chachma. It's not, I love that line. There's no intellectual grasp yet on any level. It's a sensation that there's something happening, but you haven't locked it down at all in your mind. Rather, it is, as we said before, a lightning flash, which merely hovers without yet being settled or revealed. It's like hovering or flowing. The other point of Chachma, which in the brackets he says it's the intellectually definable point of Chachma, that's where the mind begins to do its thing, however, is revealed in the intellectual vessels of Chachma. Although it is called ayin, nothingness, or undefined, relative to the third state, which is Bina, it is nonetheless revealed insofar as it is defined in a form that can be revealed in Bina. In other words, although it's not yet defined, from this point, which is stage 2, it will become defined. Stage 1 doesn't become defined. Stage 1 becomes stage 2, which is still not defined fully, which then can become defined. This level, which is the point, is the second aspect of the point of Chachma, which again is level 2. Again, all that I drew on the whiteboard before for you was only in order that when we went through this text, you should know what we're talking about, and it should be very clear. And of course to explain the concepts, but also so that you understand what the text is saying. The first level, again, he's just making sure to reiterate it and make sure it's clear by us. The first level, which you know now is the wave, is a point, he doesn't mean a point, but it's a point which is not yet an intellectual entity which may be grasped by the brain. The mind doesn't even get it at that point. It may be said that this is referred to in the verse, deep indeed are your thoughts. It's a reference it's a verse in Psalms. You see Psalms 92, footnote 121, Tehillim. So King David is speaking about God, and he says that God, deep indeed are your thoughts. So Kabbalah breaks it down. What does he mean by deep indeed are your thoughts? Thought is Chachma. Deep indeed are your thoughts. It doesn't just say, God, you have thoughts. That would mean, God, you have Chachma. No. Deep indeed are your thoughts. That means deep indeed refers to the depth of Chachma, the level of the wonders of Chachma, which flow, and this is what I mentioned before, from the Koach HaMaskil, the deepest source of intelligence within the soul. That deepest source of intelligence was the well, or the reservoir that I mentioned earlier in the class, from where the mind is taking its bucket, so to speak, and drawing new information, new wisdom into the mind. When we speak, and there's a verse about God, but it's also speaking about our understanding as well, because we're created in the image of God. So we talk about God having thoughts, Chachma, and then we talk about God's thoughts being deep indeed. Deep indeed. It's not just poetic. He's trying to say something. King David is making a point. And what he's saying is that God's Chachma is not just defined, but it's also deep indeed, which is that first level, that initial level of Chachma, which is not yet defined. It's that initial splash from the Koach HaMaskil, which is, I'll just translate the term, Koach HaMaskil. Koach means power, HaMaskil means that which can produce intelligence, or that which can think, or that which can I don't know what the right usage of the word is, but which can produce ideas. Koach HaMaskil means the source of wisdom from which the mind takes or opens up to and receives. So on that first level, when drawing from the Koach HaMaskil, it's still a wave. And this is called deep indeed are your thoughts, this deeper level of Chachma. That's within the soul. Though it has become a faculty of Chachma, right? It's not Chachma. It's in your mind on some level. It's flowing through, but your mind, before it wasn't even in your mind. Now it's flowing through that stage 1. So it's now in your mind. It is still at the level of, next page, ayin and concealment. Ayin is nothingness. Concealment means you don't even get it yet. It is the keser, or the keter, the crown of Chachma, incomparably beyond the grasp of Bina. It's the Kesser of Chachma, the crown of Chachma. It's that higher, undefined dimension of Chachma that is way beyond anything that will ultimately be defined and grasped in Bina, which is level 3. So what he's saying here is, again, I'm going to share my screen, share the whiteboard, is that this level 1, right, this level 1 right here, is incomparably higher, or it doesn't flow naturally into stage 3. You need stage 2 in the middle. Stage 1 must become stage 2, which can then become stage 3 for stage 3 to happen. There is no way to bypass. There is no easy path to go from the wave down straight to the definition of Bina. You cannot go from the higher level of Chachma to Bina without first going through stage 2. You have to do that process. So when it comes to, let me just erase that. When it comes to our thought process. So, number 1, let's discuss all the points that we discussed today. Let me stop sharing. So let's explore all the ideas that we discussed, and then we're going to jump into the next chapter and talk about the architecture of the Yud. So step number 1 is, it's the process of intellectual surrender. It's letting oneself go intellectually. The more you try to squeeze the brain, the less creative it's going to be. The more you try to define things, the tighter you're grasping, the more you're scaring away the chachma, the creative process. So step 1 is the mind has to relax and has to open, and be open to things that you don't yet know. That's step number 1 of creativity. So that's why many people, in order to get into a creative flow, they put themselves in kind of very relaxing or open situations to allow creativity to flow. The more tense, the less creative. In general, your mileage may vary. Maybe people work different ways. Necessity sometimes is said to be the mother of invention. So sometimes, a crisis gives birth to an idea. But I would say that crisis is also the breaking down of the ego. Because in that moment of crisis, you didn't know, you didn't have the answer, you were struggling, let's say, the mind became humbled by what it didn't know, and that also created the breakthrough, or paved the way for the breakthrough. So either way, it's usually relaxation, but sometimes crisis, but either way, the mind has to surrender. Because the more it's holding on to what it already knows, the less open it is to what's beyond. So step 1 is relax. Yeah, Alex, go ahead.
Even drugs, right?
Sure.
It's very well known that artists go into drugs sometimes to stimulate and to stop the rational mind from blocking. So
absolutely. In fact, there was a movement, back before my time, back in I guess the 60s, with LSD. The only way to get spirituality and spiritual clarity through LSD, and there was even someone who was a Chabad rabbi, and then and he was a proponent of that, and he said you can't understand this stuff like what we're studying. It's like you can't really get it until you've taken some substances.
Right.
And that was
Caffeine and coffee.
Right, exactly. Caffeine does that also a little bit. Alex, go ahead.
Kabbalah and LSD.
Kabbalah, yeah. the new trend. Listen, I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying that you're right. A lot of artists, a lot of creatives will look to ways to put the mind in that. What I wrote in the email, the word flow.
Rabbi.
To put oneself in that flowy consciousness to be able to become more creative. Yeah, Marcia, go ahead.
Who was it that said that? About
it's
or a comment?
it
Like
was
that?
Zalman Schachter. I don't know if you know Zalman Schachter. He was the Zalman Schachter Salami or whatever you call him. Whatever. He was my grandfather. Some of you know my grandfather. Some of you have seen him before. He's So they went to yeshiva together, back in Brooklyn, like in the original Labab in the 40s, back in the day. And then it was like him, Shlomo Carlebach, Shlomo Carlebach, the great musician. It was like a few guys, and Shlomo Carlebach did his thing with music. Zalman Schachter did his thing. By the way, Zalman Schachter, at the end, he came back. He was connected with the Chabad rabbi over there in Colorado, and he had a Chabad funeral. I mean, whatever. He did his own thing, but didn't veer far off. And look, he felt that there are certain things that you needed to really get to that depth. But when you talk about creativity, there is certainly this notion of relaxing the mind in various ways. Now, Chassidut and Kabbalah would advocate not foreign substances, but all natural. Go organic. And I don't mean, no, what I mean by organic would be study and meditation, right? Going through the process of using the mind, using the soul to get to that place. You could jumpstart it, I guess, with other substances, but who needs a shortcut if you can do the work? It's so much better if you can do the work to get to that state. So that's what Kabbalah and Chassidut would advocate is going through the journey, going through the process. And so the process would be, so again, step one, this is a different step one than before, but this is like, or maybe the preparation for step one would be relaxing the mind, letting the mind be at rest. I see in the comments, LSD and Rabbi's conclusion. Interesting. All right, I have to read that later. So it's about getting into that creative state, and then the creative idea flows in. At that original state of flow, it's undefined. It's just flowing through, and you don't even LSD. Let's start davening. Yeah. Okay. Good. We got no shortage of material on this. Yeah, I would say davening, prayer, and study, meditation, like what we're doing now, coupled with some prayer and some other things, can go a long way to relaxing the mind and getting into that state. But getting back, so the mind is relaxed, the idea flows in. Where is it coming from? Not from your mind, because you know what you know already. This is not what you know. This is coming from the koach hamaskil, that reservoir of intelligence, that reservoir of ideas that lies beyond what you know, right? It's like, does God know more than us? Yeah. Okay, so we're pulling from that fountain, from that lake of wisdom, right? Whatever you want to call it, right? We're pulling from there as the mind opens, so it is able to take in more of that, more of those ideas. At that first stage, though, it's still the first stage, right? The idea that's flowing through, you sense something, but you don't have it. Like if somebody says, "So what, Sonu? Tell me what you have." Well, I don't know. I sense that I have something. So then the mind works its magic and is able to focus and kind of concretize on some level what flowed through to get what we would call the idea, the creative idea, which is still vague, which is still creative. It's not yet defined, but at least you have now a creative idea. So that creative idea, that's what we're talking about. When people say, "Oh, I have a creative idea," and they're now working on their idea, that means that they're working from stage 2 and down, from the point down. Because stage 1 is still that magical flow, that undefined, that flow. When you feel that, by the way, that stage 1, there's such a pleasure. There's such a pleasure and a frustration, but a pleasure also in that first level, the wave dimension. It's a profound pleasure. It's when we talk about spiritual pleasures, right? What's a spiritual pleasure? It's very hard to define sometimes, but a close way of relating to it is that sense of peace and calm and exhilaration and frustration, that all of it built together in that wave that you don't yet get, that you haven't yet defined, but you know you got something. And oh boy, there's a sensation like you're getting something. It's like that, there's a pleasure there. And then you have an idea. But I don't mean an idea like a pitch. You're ready to pitch it to an investor, to a studio. Not that level yet. You have a pre-idea, an idea of an idea. That's the nakuda. That's the point. That's where you know that you have now. Wow, this. You want to share something with the world. You want to share this. Yeah, it is the aha moment. Exactly, it's that aha moment. Like, that's the first stage, but then there's, okay, now I got something. I want to share this core idea. I don't know how to do it. I don't know yet what I'm going to do, but I know that this is the big idea. And then you define it. And that's where Bina comes in. So now hopefully we have clarity on these various stages. It's amazing to map out the creative process, amazing to map out the brain. We know science, medicine, right? We know the least about the brain than any other part of the body. The brain is the greatest mystery, as we all know. The brain is absolutely the greatest mystery. How does that lump, I mean, I don't want to be like too crass here, but how does that lump do all of these amazing things? Well, Kabbalah would say it's not just a lump, it's a power of the soul, right? The mind, the way it works is because there's a koach, there's a power of the soul called chachma. Bina. Now you know that Chachma has also Keser or Keter, has a crown, which is that higher stage of Chachma, or the Pliyos Chachma, that wonder of Chachma, the Ayin, the nothingness of Chachma, right? So you have the nothingness, the Keser, the Keter, the wonder, it's the higher level, then you have the point of Chachma, and then you go into Bina. Now with this in mind, we're going to break down the architecture of the Yud. So, let me share my screen. Actually, let me check in. Any other questions or comments before we jump into 23? No? Okay. Let's jump in. Oh, let me check the chat. Okay, LSD. Okay, good. Here we go. Back into our text. Chapter 23, and me. Here we go. To elaborate further on the two levels of the point. He means two levels of Chachma. I don't want it to get confusing here. The higher level is not yet the point. The lower level is the point, but I guess he's calling both two levels of the point. He means level 1 and level 2 as we wrote it up, as we mapped it out before. So let's explain this further. There is a point. This point should be in quotation marks, because it's not a point. It's the unpoint point. There is a point which does not even have the form of a yud. Even a yud, although in essence merely a point, has at least the form of a letter. Sorry, no, let me try that again. I'm reading it wrong. Even a yud, although kind of a point, has at least the form of a letter, which indicates some degree of revelation. A point alone, however, completely without form, represents concealment and a lack of expansion, that which cannot even be a source for Bina. So what he says here is that I don't want it to work against what we've explained so far, and using the language that I used before was really more fitting with chapter 22. But in chapter 23, he now breaks it down to the letter Yud. What he says is, imagine, hold on. Okay, here we go, 1 second. I'm going to share with you one more thing. Okay, here we go. I told you there are 3 points here, or keep on using that word. 3 aspects. Number 1, the top point. Number 2, the bottom point, and the body of the Yud in the middle. Those are our 3 aspects. So what are they? So he says the top of the Yud, that top where the Yud, the Yud is so beautiful, because look at how the shape emerges from that point. You can see almost how you have a sweeping line. It's like, if we were to zoom in on it, too much. So, there's like a flat top here at the top. But imagine if it was a point. Imagine if this was drawn a little bit more accurately, where it's not like a flat top. You see how it's a little bit flat? But it really comes to the most like infinite of points. And so let me explain where I'm going with this. Second. So imagine what you have here is emerging out of nothingness, out of that white space. You have now the first notion of a line, of a point. And then it starts off just as a point. And then it expands into the body of the Yud. So that flow from almost like, I feel it within myself, and I'm trying to convey it in words. I guess I'm mirroring the process here of this, what we're talking about. But I hope you're getting the feeling of what I'm trying to convey, which is like, imagine like out of nothingness, out of thin air, suddenly something emerges. But its first emergence is just a single point, or even a point before a point. It's just something emerging, and then it develops into something. He says this is stage 1 and stage 2 of Chachma. Stage 1 is that top part of the Yud, the letter Yud. That's the wave. That's where it's not yet defined. It's just come out of nowhere, but it's not yet, it doesn't have any shape, there's nothing yet to it. Then it develops into something. Now it has a body. Now it's a body, but it's still a Yud. And if you look back, if you zoom out and look at the Yud from far, you call that a body? That's a point. You should see the real point of the Yud. You with me on this? So the Yud itself is just a point. But if you look closely, there's an initial point of the point. So, here's my point. And here's the point of chapter 23. The initial stage of Chachma, which is that flow, that nebulous, undefined, ethereal wave flow, is the top part of the Yud, that sweeping top part that just sweeps out of nowhere. That develops into something of substance, not defined, but something of substance. It's developing into something. That's what we call the point of Yud. Now it's an idea, still a creative idea, undefined idea, but it's now developed into something. Now at least you have something. And then look at the bottom of it. You see how it sweeps back down again? Love that. I love the Yud. Yud is it's so beautiful. Look how it sweeps back down again. You know what that is? That's the way the Yud flows into its next incarnation. It flows into the Hay of Bina. The Yud came out of nowhere. That's the Keter, that's the crown. Right? That wave. And then it develops into a point. The point being the body of the Yud. And then it sweeps back down. And although it looks like it's getting smaller, that just means it's becoming now defined as something, as a specific idea that is Bina. So, that is the flow, the life cycle of, make this smaller once again, the life cycle of Chachma. It starts off from an ethereal place. It then becomes defined to itself, but still is a creative idea, and then it flows, third step, into becoming really defined, which is Bina. And so in this letter Yud, which is the first letter of God's name, and if there's one thing, the first thing we know about God, is that God is the creator. Now, God is also beyond creation, but the first thing we know, because our frame of reference is we exist, and then our next understanding is, and we come from somewhere. So our first understanding of God is God in that role of making us, as creating us. So in that modality of God as creator, the first letter of God's name is the creative process, in the intellectual creative process. The sweep in from nothingness, the crystallization into somethingness, but still a point, the Yud, the body of the Yud, and then the sweep down into concretization, into becoming defined and limited in Bina. That's where ideas go to be developed and lose their creative edge. We didn't spend a lot of time focused on that this morning, but that's where ideas cease to be creative and become implementable. Right? That's no longer I have an idea. That's I have a plan. Right? That's a little bit different, which is great. It's the next step of development, and it's absolutely necessary. But we're focusing on, of course, the heart of creativity, which is the body of the Yud. So it comes from nothingness. It will flow into, define somethingness. In the middle is that Yud, that kind of in-between space. It's not nothing. It's not yet fully something. It's the Yud. It's the beautiful
Rabbi?
Yud. Yeah.
Rabbi, am I overinterpreting, or is actually stage one before that dot even appears?
Yes, the way
Takes shape.
the
Or am I
relaxation.
overinterpreting the symbol?
So stage one. Well, no. So you tell me. What do you mean by stage one?
So I think, in the stage one is kind of so I know it the wave, but I'm just thinking because it's so undefined that it's actually before you even see that dot.
Yes.
And that the dot begins the evolution
Yes.
from stage one into the body.
Yes, yes. The way Kabbalah explains it is that first step is called the Kotso Shel Yud. Very important. It's called the Kotso Shel Yud, which is what I was trying to say before. It's the point, it's the top point, which this doesn't have. So it's this image is working against me a little bit, but it's and I keep on using the same word point, but imagine if it came to an actual, if you can imagine a point, but if you zoomed in, the more you zoomed in, the more you realize like how fine that point is. It's that top edge that is step one. Because you're right, once that happens, it then develops into the body, stage two, which then develops, which will then flow into the next letter or the next stage, which is the Bina. But yeah, it's at the very tippy top.
Thank you.
Say it like the kids say it. The tippy top of the Yud is stage one. Okay, so now let's read it inside. I love being able to work with all of you in the visualization of it. Yes, Alex. Yeah, that point is like ex nihilo creation, right? Something from nothing. It's come out of nowhere, right? It's coming from. You didn't know it. You didn't understand it. You don't even have the wisdom. That idea is not inside of you. Out of nowhere, out of thin air, it starts to emerge. That moment of emergence is that point. That's the beginning of the Yud. And then it develops into a creative idea, which then can be defined and fleshed out and then shared with others. Oh, very important. The sharing with others, right, happens at the bottom half of the Yud and then below. Right? So, it's interesting. If you want to share, for sure you can't share the top. I mean, it's nothing even to speak about. You don't even understand it. So, but even if you wanted to share the body of the Yud and say, I have this creative idea, it could go, multiple directions. It's very hard to articulate that, because the moment you start articulating it, the moment you're putting that creative idea into language, you're almost doing the Bina process. So you're cutting it short. You're boxing it in at that stage, and it's necessarily going to take on a limited form. It's very hard to convey that stage two of Chachma, even though it's stage two, not stage one. It's still hard to convey it in that form. It's usually once it's flowed into Bina, and now you have a definitive way of understanding it. You're like, here, listen to my idea. What do you think of it? Here's my idea. Here's my plan. But to speak of that creative idea with like infinite possibilities of it, which is stage two, not even stage one, but stage two, but it still has infinite possibilities, very hard to articulate. Okay, let's stop. Let me switch the share back to the text. Let's jump in. I have to start again from the beginning. Okay, there is a point, second paragraph here. There is a point which does not even have the form of a Yud. Even a Yud has at least the form of a letter, which indicates some degree of revelation. A point alone, and that's what I said, the Kotso Shel Yud, the edge of the Yud at the top. A point alone, however, completely without form, represents concealment and a lack of expansion, that which cannot even be a source for Bina. Let's continue inside. The second level, which is the body of the Yud, is comparable to the form the body of the letter Yud, which extends somewhat breadthwise and has two protrusions above and below. The breadth may be seen as that point of Chachma which has already descended to a state, a revealed intellect in the mind, and can then lead to understanding, which is Bina. So that first initial emergence of the letter, that's the higher nebulous level. Then it develops into something that has some sort of shape. There's a body to the Yud. Oh, that's what we call the point, or that's level 2. And that can then flow into understanding. So the lower tip, the lower coats, again, the coats is the tip. So we talked about the higher tip. The lower tip of the first letter of the name Havai, the first letter of God's name, indicates a tendency toward the expansion of the following letter, Hey. In other words, the next letter that follows it in God's name. Oh, so to be very clear, in God's name, first is the letter Yud, and then the letter Hey. The letter Hey is Bina, full expansion. So the bottom tip of the Yud is what draws it into the limitation, the expansion limitation of Bina, i.e. it indicates the potential of Chachma to then be comprehended through Bina. Now, Bina is antithetical to the entire concept of Chachma. In other words, Bina and Chachma are inherently opposites. Cats and dogs. I don't know if cats and dogs are opposites, but whatever. But Bina and Chachma are absolute opposites. Again, let's read this last paragraph together again. Bina, right? So the Hey, the letter Hey, is antithetical. It's complete polar opposite to the entire concept of Chachma. Why? Because Chachma is ayin, nothing, and concealment. Chachma is abstract, creative wisdom, or creative ideas, but abstract. Bina, which is all about breaking it down and understanding it and making sense of it, is the exact opposite of Chachma, which is why I said before, I gave the example of children. For the adult, a box is a box. It serves a utility to ship this item from one place to the other. You put it into a box, you seal it up, you send it off, the person receives it and gets it. And that's the box. The child on the other end looks at the box and says, great, a rocket ship, a house, this, that, all sorts of possibilities. Because the process of defining and the process of creating or creativity, two different, are opposite themes. One is making things defined and concretized, and one is making things abstract and undefined. Complete opposites. As mentioned above, back inside, last line on this page. As mentioned above, the ayin of Chachma signifies total concealment. Moreover, even the expansive element of Chachma, which is the second level of Chachma, which is the body of the Yud, it's still only a point. In other words, undefined, vague, infinite potential. For in it, the entire idea in question is grasped as a general point. When he talks about the entire idea in general, what he means is, the entire idea in question. Let's say you're struggling with, you have a question. Yeah? You're trying to figure something out. Careful. I'll help you soon. Don't pull it down. Take a chair and get it, because I don't want that to fall down. Okay? So let's say you're trying to figure out a problem. Right? And that's when you get the creative idea. So it's important to note, he says, that at that point, the point of Chachma, the answer to your question is still vague, it's still general. Even this level is ayin in comparison to Bina. Chachma is not limited, as is Bina. Like flowing water, as mentioned above, it can assume varying forms. The first answer to your question is still in general terms, and it can take so many different paths, so many different possibilities. As the intellectual process will continue to flow, it will become more defined. but it absolutely will begin in a general sense. That's all Chachma. The faculty, so Chachma is all about undefinition. It's all about infinite possibilities. It's all about not being limited. The faculty of Bina, on the other hand, so that's the Yud. The faculty of Bina, on the other hand, is by definition amplified into many particulars and is clearly limited. So Bina is absolutely about the limitation. It's about the definition. Hence, the difference between them can be described thus. Here we go. If you want to contrast them, compare and contrast them in a nutshell, here's what it is. Chachma grasps an idea in a general manner, unamplified. What is unamplified in the Hebrew? Let me see what he said. Let me see what the Hebrew is with unamplified. Hold on. Oh. Heder hispashtus. Unamplified. I don't know. Unamplified sounds maybe a little bit of a weird word in English to use. Chachma grasps an idea in a general manner. Heder hispashtut. That means it's not. I guess amplified, but it's not yet divided into buckets. It's not yet put into a limited place. It's still general and it can go in any direction. It's like, it's the point, Chachma is, that could go any direction. From this point you could go anywhere, as opposed to Bina, which already is in a definitive direction. It's either going this way or that way, but Bina is already deciding where it's going to go. Again, think of a creative idea. You want to tell a story. Or you have a story. You have an idea of a story. How are you going to tell it? Which medium are you going to use? Within that medium, how are you going to tell it? So, Chachma is just the idea. Creative idea. Not just. I don't mean to minimize it, but it's the pure idea. The creative idea, which can go in any direction. There's a freedom on that level. Right? You can go anywhere. Any direction with this idea. You can be clear, you can be vague, you can be art, you can be music, you can be film, you can be drama, you can be dance, anything. Literature. It's completely open to possibility. And it's thrilling to know that it could go in any direction. Bina takes a little bit of the fun out, right? Bina now locks it in. Okay, it makes sense to do this, and you're breaking it down. What makes sense? How does it make sense to do? So, Chachma grasps the idea in a general manner, unamplified. It's not yet defined. Bina grasps it in a form that is amplified into its many specific particulars. Thus, they are the antithesis of one another. They are absolute opposites. It's funny, because we think of one, and even the way I drew it before on the whiteboard, it's like, oh yeah, it flows. First you have the ethereal idea, then you have the defined point, and then it goes into Bina, real definition. It seems like it flows. He says, are you kidding me? These are opposites. Chachma and Bina, they're like opposites. The fact that they flow, by the way, one into the other is a miracle, right? Because Chachma by definition is anti-Bina, and Bina by definition is anti-Chachma. How are they unified? They are united by the lower protrusion of the Yud, which represents the tendency of Chachma towards Bina. There's something in Chachma, the bottom part of Chachma, that little, you saw it, that little tail of Chachma is the one that's like, maybe Bina, maybe we'll go into Bina as well. There's something in Chachma, in that abstract place, that says, let's define it. Even inside Chachma. And that's the magic that bridges the two opposites of Chachma and Bina. Because looked at purely from an energy level, from an energy perspective, on an energy level, the energy of Chachma and the energy of Bina are polar opposites. What draws them together is that almost impossibly, but by design, by God's divine design, there is a tendency within Chachma to lean toward Bina, a tendency toward within the abstract, creative wisdom to be drawn toward concretization, application. And conversely, there's a space within Bina, within the Hay, within concrete, defined thinking to tend toward the abstract. So each one has an element of the other, and because of that, we now have a bridge. So imagine, I want to use a bridge as in two land masses, unrelated. Land A, land B. In the middle is a river. So there's nothing connecting these two. Then you build a bridge. How does a bridge work? I'm not getting into the architecture of a bridge because that's beyond my pay grade. Suspension versus, what does a bridge essentially do? It has elements. It touches one side and it touches the other side. Which means there's a part of land A that's now extending toward B, and there's a part of land B that's extended toward land A. So in and of themselves, they're separate. But you've now leaned from one into the other and from the other into the other, and now they can meet somewhere in the middle. So the Yud, so Chachma, which is symbolized by the Yud of God's name, the Yud has that initial point, which is how it flows from the wonder of beyond, and that nebulous state. It then develops into the abstract idea. It's not really much of a development, but it becomes the abstract idea. But then there's the bottom of the Yud, and that's the part that says, you know what? Let's define it. Let's define it further. Let's make a plan with this. Because to just be in that abstract space is also maybe frustrating creatively, because you're looking for an outlet for the creativity. You have that story to tell, or you have that message to convey. You have that point, the creative point, and it can go in any number of ways. But if you stay stuck in the possibility, it's also no fun. Part of Chachma yearns and craves for some sort of expression. That's the bottom of the Yud. And let's conclude. Might as well conclude. We just have one more paragraph left. I'm going to pick next week. I'm going to start again from this last paragraph, but I want to do it now. We'll elaborate. Don't worry, but I want to get it in now. The matter can be understood according to the teachings of Sefer Yetzirah. Now, I got to tell you what this is for a second. Sefer Yetzirah means the book, Sefer Yetzirah, of formation. This is a book that was either written by Abraham, like Avram Avinu, the first patriarch, who was a mystic, or by Adam himself. So this is the most ancient book of Kabbalah, is Sefer Yetzirah. So it says in Sefer Yetzirah, it says, Havein b'chachma and chacham b'bina. Understand through wisdom and become wise. The English doesn't matter how it's translated. These are concepts, not words. Havein b'chachma means, I'm just going to tell. Havein b'chachma means that within chachma, there's havein, there's bina. There's a tendency toward bina within chachma. And chacham b'bina means within bina, there's a tendency toward chachma, to go back and become pure and abstract. So he asked the question, it would surely seem more appropriate to say become wise through wisdom and understand through understanding. In other words, it should have just said chacham b'chachma and havein b'bina. It should have said chacham b'chachma, wise with wisdom, and understand with understanding. Why does it mix the two words? Havein, bina, b'chachma, and chacham b'bina. It's mixing the energies. However, this quotation teaches that chachma and bina are inclusive of each other. It's all about being inclusive, right? There is bina within chachma, hence understand through wisdom, and there's chachma within bina, hence become wise through understanding. We're going to explore this more next week. But I wanted to make sure to get this last point in, to understand that even within the mind, even within these powers of the mind and creativity, it's less defined as we think. And even the creative mind craves application. The artist will get the greatest satisfaction sometimes when somebody is able to appreciate the art. Because as thrilling as it was in that creative state where it could have been anything, there's also something thrilling to somebody looking at what was made and getting it. And that's the Bina within Chachma. And it works the other way around. The Bina, which is all about the analytics, I got it, defined, also yearns for something a little bit more abstract. We'll speak about this next week. What's the message for us? This class is all about unity. And it's all about understanding how to get along better with people. So what does today have to do with that? I'm glad you asked. Ultimately, the idea here is that when things become particular, like in Bina, that's when differentiation happens, and that's when we might feel tension between us and someone else. I understand it this way, you understand it that way, so we don't see eye to eye, and maybe we don't get along. The goal of all this is to understand how everything begins with Chachma, with that creative wave, and then the creative point. On the level of Chachma, all the possibilities are there. And if we're able to peel back the layers of our particular understanding, we each have our own ways of being, but if we're able to lift up a little bit, to go back to where it started, to regain that childlike curiosity and creativity, maybe the box is not a box. Maybe that person is not that person. Maybe the box can be anything. And maybe, just maybe, we can get along and be one. That's where we're going with this idea. Thank you very much for joining me today for Kabbalah Coffee. It's easy to talk. Let's put the words into action. Let's live a week. Until 1 week at a time with this class. Let's live a week.
Rabbi,
Thank you very much, Ari.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
Inspirational.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Very beautiful.
Great class.
Thank you.
really
Thank you.
nice class.
I appreciate the good feedback. Let's live a week
Rabbi,
which is a little less defined and a little bit more open to the possibilities. Yes, Marcia, go ahead.
Rabbi, I didn't want to ask the question a little earlier, but when you were discussing the letter form
Yeah.
and its points and the width and so on and so forth, and the symbolism, sometimes I've noticed in the siddur, particularly maybe the Lubavitch siddur, occasionally a letter will have ornate crowns and protrusions on
Yes.
top.
Yes.
And I've never understood what that was. I will ask, and it'll be, I don't know if it's the word or in an unexpected place or something like that. And I just wondered if you had some insight.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, when it comes to writing the letters and the words in Scripture, when it comes to writing the Torah, our Torah scroll, the laws of Safrut, the laws of being a scribe, say that certain letters get crowns at the top of the letters. And the crown is basically from that top point that we discussed today, you have almost like a flowery type embellishment. And
Right.
these are halacha l'Moshe miSinai. These were taught by God to Moses at Mount Sinai from the beginning. When God told Moses what the letters look like, he also said that when you're writing it in the Torah, right, certain letters get crowns. It was only maybe 1,000 years later, 1,000 years plus later, that Rabbi Akiva, the great scholar Rabbi Akiva, was able to actually explain the meaning behind some of these crowns. And it says that the great sage, that he was able to explain the meaning of the crowns. So great was his understanding, Rabbi Akiva, that it says that Moses was shown, when Moses was, he was once speaking to God, what does the future look like? What is are they going to continue to study Torah? So God says, let me show you. He takes him in, his soul, into a class that Rabbi Akiva is teaching 1,300 years later. And Moses comes out of that class and he says, you know what? I have no idea what he's talking about. In other words, it's such a high level. It was so deep, so So, and the analysis was so fierce, even Moses didn't understand it. And so the message is, the crowns are from the beginning. The explanation of that kind of unfolds through history. But there's also a related explanation of this story, which is what we, related to what we spoke about today. That sometimes in the realm of Chachma, we don't even know where it's going to go. It's that creative point, like the Torah, right, is that creative point. How it gets applied and where it goes, that's a stage further. So Moses saw the beginning. When he was taken into Rabbi Akiva, it says his face became white. He became very humbled by the wisdom that was being offered by Rabbi Akiva. Anyway, so I hope that addressed your question. I know your question was about the crowns. There are crowns. It doesn't need to be written in any other context, essentially, other than Torah. I would imagine in the prayer book, in instances where it's quoting verses from Torah, that may be the time that it's using the crowns in a font, as opposed to other times. But it's really for a Torah-specific purpose, and the wisdom of which we will probably never fully fathom. Kabbalists speak a little bit about it. Rabbi Akiva, it says was able to teach about it. The full wisdom of it, it's one of these mysteries of the code. Oh, I should mention.
Okay,
yeah, sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Okay. I sent you an email once, or whatever this chat stuff is. Did you see that new documentary on Squirrel Hill?
Oh, I need to look back at the email. I don't know if I did.
I think you can find it online.
So I need to look up your email. No, I did not see it, but I'm very excited to see it.
I'll try to find the link. It was somebody had very early footage, and they went backwards.
Oh, maybe I did see it. Maybe I did see it. Was it like the butcher shops and that sort of thing?
Yes.
I think I did see it, Ash. I think I did see it. But I'm gonna double check. I'm gonna look through my emails and I'll double check to make sure.
Thank you for class.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for being here. I should mention, you just reminded me, Marcia, that we are going to start in the next few weeks. We'll start a course on Gematria, Hebrew numerology. So that is going to be a class starting soon. Stay tuned. Have not yet released the details of that, but it's coming up in August. A course on numerology, 3-part course on numerology, the secrets of the numbers of letters. If you like math, if you like Hebrew, if you like Hebrew math, if you like math Hebrew, whatever, etc., in any combination, secrets of Torah, we're going to be exploring that. It's an unbelievable topic. So, all right, that is that. Thank you all for joining.
All right, bye-bye.
It's great to see you all. We'll see you all soon. Have a wonderful week. Stay healthy, please.
Thank you.
Take care. We'll see you all soon. Bye. Shavua Tov.